Almost 2,000 years ago, a Celtic queen proved the truth of the famous saying, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned."
On the embankment at Westminster Bridge on the River Thames, across the road from Big Ben and the Houses of Parliament, and just a few feet away from Westminster Abbey, stands a magnificent monument to a first-century Celtic queen. The imposing statue of bronze depicts this ancient queen in her war chariot, both arms upraised as she holds a spear in her right hand. Her two daughters ride with her, one on each side of their mother. Pulling her chariot are two horses reared up, ready to charge forth into battle. Protruding from each wheel of her chariot is a mean-looking razor-sharp scythe, reminding us that this queen meant business. Her name was Boadicea. Another spelling of her name could be pronounced Boudica. But whatever way you see her name spelled in history, this one woman led her people in a war like no other and almost defeated the mighty armies of Rome. The statue was crafted in the 19th century during the reign of Queen Victoria, whose name means victory. Interestingly, victory is the meaning of the woman's name who's driving that chariot. Needless to say, Queen Victoria loved the statue of Boadicea. Few stories in British history are as thrilling as that of this first-century Celtic queen. Long after her death, the Celts minted coins stamped Boutica, Bootika, translated the victorious. So what is her story? And why is her likeness important enough for such a vaunted place in the beating heart of London? Boadicea's husband was king of the Iceni, the richest and most powerful Celtic tribe in Roman Britain. Yet, as powerful as were the Iceni, they were still subject to Roman law. So, when a new emperor of Rome came to the throne, the king of the Iceni, to keep his people prosperous, made Rome's new emperor godfather to his daughters. Now, there have been fatal mistakes by many a historical figure, but this one was a doozy. For this emperor was none other than the notoriously evil Nero. Not long after, the king of the Iceni died. Hardly cold in his grave, Nero's men seized the king's land and treasures, then made his queen and her countrymen and women slaves. When the widowed queen protested rather loudly, the Romans promptly tied her to a post and scourged her savagely. But the worst was yet to come. In a fate more hideous than that of their mother, Roman soldiers raped Boadicea's two young daughters. The burning rage of a mother began, the scream of rage against cruel oppression. Nothing brought the Celts together like this. You've heard the expression, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned." This was it. Roman historian Tacitus writes, "The queen was bowed by agonies that found no name. Their immortal wrongs darken the pages of history, which has no record so atrocious." Churchill writes, "The story of her wrongs roused every heart in the kingdom. Boadicea was moved to a frenzy against the Roman invaders and found herself at the head of an army of her countrymen, too numerous to count, who rallied to her standard." Later chroniclers would call Boadicea woman of the sword. She was all that and more. Perhaps this was rooted in the ritual of new mothers with new sons in the warrior culture of the Celts. A new mother would place the child's first food on the point of the father's sword and insert it into the infant's mouth. In the words of a later scribe, that the babe might face his father's future enemies with his sword and javelin. We're not exactly told what a newborn daughter might face, but we know that Celtic women were ready to share the dangers of the battlefield. Except for expectant mothers, Celtic women march with their husbands and brothers. Not to be left out, The older women came alongside, encouraging the men to valor. I'd like to think that Queen Emma was inspired by Queen Boadicea. How could she not be? So after the episode, The Game, when Emma is ready to return to England and fight, I couldn't miss the opportunity to tell the story of the Celtic warrior queen who lived and fought and died 1,000 years before Emma came on the scene. So let's pick it up from there, on Emma's return trip to England, and from her perspective, when her wise mentor Alwyn tells the story of London and Boadicea, and to her eager young son, Alfred the Etheling, the throne-worthy prince. My marriage was broken, but my position as queen was secure. But for how long? England was in peril. As I prepared for an unhappy departure from Normandy, word came from Wessex. Sweyn Forkbeard, King of Denmark, was dead. After a fatal fall from his horse, the formidable Norse overlord summoned his son and heir, Canute, to give his final wishes to his successor. The Danish fleet is yours, my son. No matter the cost, take England. Do not leave me here in this foreign land. Put me at peace. Bury my bones in the land of my birth, my Denmark. As the great Norseman lay dying, Sweyn Forkbeard proclaimed Canute King of Denmark and claimant to the English throne. The royal House of Wessex faced a cold crossing over the great channel in more ways than one. When it was time to board the ship and say our final goodbyes, Duke Robert, my nephew, and his young son William stood with us on the beaches of Normandy. Robert, I clasped my nephew's hand lovingly. Take care of our little Duke. I will. Robert looked down and affectionately ruffled the thick hair of his son. Little William threw his arms around me. Oh, Aunt Emma. William buried his face in the folds of my tunic. I know you must go, but may I come see you? I have never been to England. Of course, William. I hugged him tightly. I know in my heart you will be in England someday. Come, Emma. Ethelred reached for my hand. As I stepped toward him, I remembered a time when I gave my hand willingly. It was long ago. As we crossed the choppy channel, Alfred was fascinated as Alwyn imparted his vast knowledge of ships and seas. My old friend kept my youngest enthralled with his many stories of the people who had in long times past inhabited the domains of the mystical island across the sea. A people from a land of fogs and mists and marshy rivers, untamed humans with unruly spirits, wild folk who looked for answers in the entrails of animals, island folk who built rings of giant stones to mark the skies and pay homage to unseen gods. With the white cliffs in view, we hugged the southeast coast of England and sailed north to the mouth of the mighty River Thames. The Celts gave the great river its name, Alwyn told Alfred. Thames. It means dark, for little can be seen beneath its deep, mysterious waters. Primitive people, natives to this island, believed the river was magical, for it made all life possible. How did it do that? Alfred asked. The river gave them water to drink and to wash, and made it possible to grow crops and sustain their animals. So how is the river magical? Alfred's eyes grew big. Old Father Thames flows in and out from the sea. Its depth can change, making its water swirl and twist, as if the old river had a mind of its own. Alfred peeked over the ship's rails and looked down to the turbulent waters. When they watched the moon, Alwyn smiled, they saw the tides flow in and out of the sea. To ancient people, this was magical, for when the moon changed, so did the river. Oh, Mother, look, Alfred exclaimed as the massive walls of London came into view. It's London Bridge. My heart quickened. England's finest city could still take my breath away. as did mighty London Bridge. Alwyn put his arms around Alfred's shoulders to direct his view. Although the bridge is quite long, it is so broad 2 wagons can pass each other, and so strong the bridge can withstand ramming ships. Alfred's eyes grew wide as the ship drew closer. "Tell me a story, Alwyn," my son entreated, "an exciting one." The great teacher rubbed his chin, attempting to hide a smile as he looked into the eyes of the eager youngster. "How would you like to hear about a brave queen who led a great army across the Thames and almost defeated the Romans?" "Yes, I want to hear." As Alwyn began to weave his tale, servants and seamen moved closer to hear the master storyteller. I shook my head in amusement. Alwyn was in his element. Everyone who gathered hung on his every word. "Boadicea was her name," he began, "great warrior queen of the Celts. After her husband was killed by the Romans, Nero's soldiers violated her 2 daughters horribly. Then they stood Boadicea up to a post and beat her brutally." Suddenly, Alwyn's tale came alive just as it did when he told it to me so long ago. Now I would experience it through the eyes of my son, new, fresh, and raw. My body stiffened at the thought of such rapacious, raw brutality. A queen left bleeding from Roman rods, her daughters ravaged, a tale for children no more. A real story of a real woman who suffered unspeakably upon this island. Alwyn sensed my ire and paused to look out over the waters. I remained quiet as I stepped to the rail of the ship to gaze across the vastness of the river. Boadicea wanted justice, Alwyn's steady voice echoed off the water. 100,000 Britons joined the bold queen as she led a massive force not even Rome could stop. "What happened then?" Alfred's small voice breathless. "Celts from all over the island joined her rebellion against the Romans." I turned and stepped to Alfred, placing my arm around his shoulders. Hearing it again, seeing it through his eyes, made my heart bleed at the wrongs done to this noble woman. "What did she look like?" Alfred asked eagerly. Her face was beautiful but stern, framed by a great mass of fiery red hair that spread all over her shoulders, falling to her hips to fly about in the wind. Her plaited tunic of many colors was drawn close and fastened by a large brooch of bronze. She wore a large neck ring of coiled metal like the Greek warriors, the mark of highest command. She stood tall and had a terrifying voice, and she could drive a chariot as well as any man. "Oh, yes," Alwyn feigned fear, shuddering as his shoulders trembled and his voice quickened. "Boadicea was a fearsome sight." Alwyn glanced at me and bit back a smile. "Ah, the power of one woman," he teased. I returned his look with a slight roll of my eyes. But the wings of my heart soared at my dear friend, bringing to my son the bright and fiery images of what it was like to be a strong queen. I stood transfixed as Alfred listened, his eyes upon the master teacher, remembering with fondness the same lessons, experiencing them in a new way. "Then brave Boadicea and her army did the unthinkable," Alwyn continued. "At her command, they burned 3 cities to the ground." Alwyn paused, "including the one you see before you." "London?" Alfred asked quietly. "Yes, Alfred, London." Rome was outraged and disgraced that a woman could beat them and destroy their greatest city. This could not stand. They sent their best general to stop Boadicea once and for all. The 2 armies met in a large grove, sacred to the Celts. The Romans cut down the trees to insult Boadicea and her army. On both sides, it was all for all. Right before the final battle, Boadicea pulled a live hare from under her cloak and let it loose to run between the two armies. A hare, you say? Yes, Alfred. The hare was sacred to the Celts, an omen of victory or defeat. With the forest to their backs, so no Celts could attack from behind, the Romans forced Boadicea to fight uphill. The Roman lines held, and their legions came down hard on the Celts. It was a massacre. What happened to the queen? Alfred questioned quietly. She refused to surrender. The valiant Celtic warrior sacrificed herself rather than fall in Roman hands. She took poison and cried out, "Liberty or death." It is said that under Platform 9 of King's Cross Station in London lay the bones of Boadicea. I'd like to think so. It's too fun not to imagine that. But do we have hard evidence that 2,000 years ago a Celtic warrior queen was roused to rebellion and routed the Romans? Yes, we do. For not only do stones and bones reveal history stories, layers of charcoal can too. Indeed, a layer of charcoal lies under the great city of London and under two former Roman cities near London, Colchester, once called Camalodunum, and St. Albans, once called Verulamium. 3 cities Boadicea laid waste by fire and sword, and burnt to the ground. Edmund Spenser, contemporary of William Shakespeare, author of the epic poem Faerie Queene about Elizabeth I, and buried in Westminster Abbey next to Geoffrey Chaucer, penned a poem about Boadicea from the perspective of the city of London. I was that city which the garland wore by Roman victors which it won of yore, though not at all but ruins I be, and lie in mine own ashes, as ye see. I shall leave you with perhaps the finest words ever penned about the immortal warrior queen from ancient Britain. Carved in granite at the base of her magnificent statue that stands between the power centers of London is one phrase by 18th century English poet William Cowper from his poem Boadicea, an Ode. Regions Caesar never knew, thy posterity shall sway. Perhaps these words also apply to Emma of Normandy, Queen of England.
Thank you for joining us for Season 2 of Stones and Bones. This brings an end to this wonderful second season. We're so grateful for all the folks that are tuning into our podcast. Our host, Deborah Brazina, has been very busy writing a book. The Lady About Queen Emma is in pre-sales and can be purchased at stonesandbonespodcast.com. Thank you again. Have a great and wonderful year, and we look forward to Season 3. We invite you to share the Stones and Bones podcast with those who love history, those who love all things medieval, British, and Viking. Follow Stones and Bones on Facebook and Instagram for exclusive content and to stay up to date on new projects and releases. Don't forget to tag Stones and Bones and use the hashtag SBPodcast so we see your post on social media.